Well, hello and welcome to the Lancaster Patriot Podcast. My name is Chris Hume. Thank you for joining me today. The 2024 Future of Christendom Conference just ended, and there will be lots of content dropping on Future of Christendom's YouTube page in the near future. Panel discussion, expositions, debate, formal moderated debate on the topic of immigration. I'm not aware of another debate between two Christians who would generally agree on the application of God's law word in society in many ways, a lot of agreements, but yet disagreeing over the immigration issue. Those are the discussions we need to be having. How does the law of God apply in society? I will have an episode coming up shortly here where I do some armchair quarterbacking on that debate as well, sharing my thoughts. I think we need to have more of those discussions. And I think that debate also deals with the issue of natural law versus God's law, theonomy versus natural law. I think there's a lot of people out there that are teaching on natural law that are maybe giving lip service to what might be called general equity theonomy that I would argue, in my humble opinion, still do not understand the dangers of natural law and the distinction between natural law and God's law. Specifically, what we've argued on this podcast, what I've argued, what Luke Saint has argued, especially in his book, The Sound Doctrine of Theocracy, namely, we do not need more man-made legislation. We need God's law. We need that applied, and we need judges to adjudicate cases based on God's law. Now, the thing with natural law is that it leads to man-made legislation. And so we'll talk a little bit about that today. Actually, today, this will be a short episode. I want to talk a little bit about something that a sheriff, I believe it's Riverside County, California, the sheriff of that county, I watched his press conference with the public where he was sharing, this is the sheriff of Riverside County, sharing what happened in this potential third assassination attempt. For those of you who are not aware, there was a Trump rally in California, and the sheriff's department had an outside perimeter, inside perimeter, and then there was still an entrance into the facility. And so the sheriff's department apprehended a man on the far outside perimeter, and he had weapons, he had ammunition, and I'm not sure of all the details, but basically the sheriff claims they thwarted a third assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump. So I want to play a clip, just a portion of that sheriff's press conference, and I want to talk about something that he brings up in passing, and most people when they hear it just assume, okay, yeah, the sheriff's right about what he says about the sovereign citizens. Now, I don't know I've heard the term sovereign citizens, especially as it relates to the Amos Miller case, and I'm going to bring that up, but I'm not familiar with maybe one person who would use that term, but I'm not familiar with a movement or an organized group. They may be out there, but I just have had no interaction with them. I'm going to read something from Wikipedia, and I'm going to play the sheriff's I'm going to play this clip from the sheriff where he talks about sovereign citizens. But I really want us to consider this because, again, this is another example of an area where I do not think we are thinking deeply about what it means to reform our society. We're brainwashed in statism. We're drowning in statism. So it's so hard for us to step back and say, what would it look like if we had biblical justice and not statism? And again, that's something that Luke does very well in his book, The Sound Doctrine of Theocracy. I also try to do it in my book, 7 Statist Sins. What would it look like if we had biblical justice? And that's going to be some of my comments when I get to it in another episode on the immigration debate. It was a good debate. I'm thankful for Alan Miracle for coming from Oklahoma to participate in that debate against Luke Saint. I think they both did a fine job. But I think there's a couple areas that I would like to, again, it's easy to armchair quarterback and say, I still think we've missed the point here and we're still operating within the realm of statism to a degree. I think Luke brought that up, and I just want to bring that up more. But that's for another podcast. But I do want to play this clip from the sheriff of Riverside County, California, and I want you to listen to him, and I want you to try to think critically about what he's saying and then the implications of that. And I want to draw those out. I want to draw these implications out, that what this man is saying about the sovereign citizens. Now, of course, if this man's goal was to go in there and kill President Trump, I don't agree with that. But I'm not talking about the assassination attempt. I'm talking about what this sheriff says about the sovereign citizens.
Sovereign citizens. It's a I don't know any in a law enforcement world. That's what we call them. That's what they call themselves, sovereign citizens, and it's just a political belief, if you will, that that government rules and laws and everything else that goes along with it doesn't apply to them. I won't say they have a lot. Law enforcement across the country, we train on how to deal with them just because of the verbiage that they use when they interact with us. They believe that they're not necessarily toward us violent or confrontational, but it's obvious they don't ever want to answer our questions. They don't believe they need driver's licenses. They don't believe this, and this vehicle goes along with it. They don't register their vehicles. This was an unregistered car that we had to go through VIN number and manufacturer process to verify that it was a legitimate car. It actually did belong to him. It's just, we know it was sold to him. It just was not ever registered.
Okay, obviously it's unfortunate in this situation that the person they're talking about allegedly was potentially going to attempt an assassination on Donald Trump. Again, I obviously don't know what his intentions were, and that's not what I'm speaking about. What I'm speaking about are the comments that this sheriff made about this group that he terms as sovereign citizens. Now, I pulled up the Wikipedia definition. I want to read this for you. The sovereign citizen movement, also SovCit movement or SovCits, is a loose group of anti-government activists, litigants, tax protesters, financial scammers, and conspiracy theorists based mainly in the United States. Sovereign citizens have their own pseudo-legal belief system based on misinterpretations of common law and claim to not be subject to any government statutes unless they consent to them. Okay, I want to discuss this. Now, I don't agree with this entirely, but this is something that needs to be explained from a biblical worldview, from a theonomic worldview, because I think 9 times out of 10, the people that I'm hearing, especially those who are in the Reformed circles, who would be friendly with natural law, with Stephen Wolfe's book, The Case for Christian Nationalism, and who would critique theonomy, I don't think they understand this. I do not think they understand what is really going on here at the fundamental level. So this quote from Wikipedia in the sheriff's comments, you'll note what he said. He said, "These people think that the government and rules and laws do not apply to them," and the Wikipedia page says, unless they consent to them. Okay, so that's the main charge against this group. And again, I'm not talking about this group as some organized group with a leader. I'm just speaking about as people who would, for example, say, you know what, it is not just that you are requiring me to have a driver's license to drive down the road. You'll note in the video, the sheriff said, we had to do some work to figure out whether this car belonged to him. And it turns out the car did belong to him. It just wasn't registered. So in that case, again, I'm not talking about the assassination attempt, because this happens where the police officers, extortion officers, will pull someone over, and the only crime, quote unquote, they've committed is that they didn't register their car with the state. Clearly, for example, he says the car belonged to him, but you know what he did wrong? He didn't tell the state and announce to them, hey, over here, I just paid for this vehicle, so will you please tax me and force me to pay you every year so I can keep driving it? That's the crime of the sovereign citizens in the sense. Again, I'm not a fan of that term, but I understand the concept. So he's saying, well, you know what? These people don't believe the government rules and laws apply to them. They say they don't believe they need to get driver's license. Okay. Now, I don't consider myself a sovereign citizen or part of that movement. However, there would be some serious overlap between biblical law, theonomy, justice, and at least some of the claims or some of the things that Wikipedia or the sheriff are attributing to the sovereign citizen movement. People who say, you know what, you are not justified in requiring me to get a license or register to do X, Y, or Z. This is an extremely important point, and I've talked about it a lot with Raw Milk. For example, with this language, people like the sheriff and Wikipedia and also the liberal media, when the whole Amos Miller story was happening and it's ongoing, said the same thing. Oh, Amos Miller, he's one of those sovereign. He thinks that he can do what he wants. He doesn't need to submit to the laws of the state. Understand this. The state will keep making law after law after law. And if you do not register with them in order to sell cookies to your neighbor, you fall into this category. You're a conspiracy theorist. You don't think the government applies to you because you didn't go to your Department of Agriculture and say, hey, I'd like a cottage license to sell a loaf of bread to my neighbor. That's what this is about. And so many Christian thinkers out there who are in the political sphere, who are arguing for natural law, who are gung-ho about Stephen Wolf's book and the idea of a Christian prince, they do not grasp this concept that if you allow man to make laws for the quote-unquote common good, it never ends. And so I guarantee you that this sheriff in this clip, I guarantee you that there are rules and regulations that he does not follow. Why? Why? Is he a conspiracy theorist? Is he a financial scammer? No, he is someone who says, you know what? Whether he says it consciously or not, there are a million man-made laws in the state of California. My goodness. I mean, that man is in California. I guarantee you every day he's breaking rules and regulations, maybe sometimes intentionally, simply because I don't want to go through the trouble of registering, with the state in order to sell eggs to my neighbor. There are many people say it's not the state's prerogative. They have no authority to require me to tell them how I'm educating my children, to report to the state and say, oh, most worthy eternal state, please allow me to homeschool my children. Again, if you take this mindset and say, you know what? If you think that you can choose which laws to follow or not, you're a conspiracy theorist and you're this insane person. Anybody who says that is a hypocrite, and I would challenge them. They're a hypocrite because there are hundreds of regulations that they don't follow. Okay, I got a lot to say on this, but I got to keep it brief. I want to pull up a page here from the National Archives, archives.gov, a government website, okay? And the title of the article is An Act of Courage, the Arrest Records of Rosa Parks, okay? Rosa Parks, famous civil rights activist, famous story, refusing to move on the bus. Obviously, everybody in the government today and all the elites are going to praise Rosa Parks, and rightly so, for her actions. Of course, being politically correct, we can't say anything against any of the civil rights activists. And so in this case, I have nothing poor to say about Rosa Parks. In this case, I don't know much about her. But what I want to point out here is that listen to what this article says. Again, the title is An Act of Courage, the Arrest Records of Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks, an African-American, was arrested that day for violating a city law requiring racial segregation on public buses. Now, she is lauded as a courageous hero on this government website. Why? Why is Rosa Parks lauded as a hero? You know why? Because she said, this law is wrong and I'm not going to follow it. Now, again, if you take this mindset of the sheriff, and he's just a normal guy, just like most Americans haven't thought about this, and most Christian thinkers who are even arguing in the political sphere, who are arguing for natural law, haven't thought about this either. We cannot have the mindset that just because man creates legislation that now we are obligated to follow it. Nobody believes that. I mean, I've just proven it. The very people that the most liberal statist person today, whether they're liberal or conservative, a lot of them are statist, whether it's Rep. Zimmerman, whoever. Rep. Zimmerman, of course, arguing, Amos Miller should follow all these regulations, and Amos Miller is in the wrong because he's serving his neighbor without the government's permission. So he's a statist as well. All those people, to a man, would applaud Rosa Parks. They would say, she did the right thing. What did Rosa Parks do? She defied the man-made law. So these people are hypocrites, and it's very frustrating when you see, the sheriff, I understand, he's probably not thinking biblically about these things, but when you hear Christian thinkers who have put some time into political theory, if you will, and don't understand this, and think that people out there who don't get driver's license or register their vehicle or register with the state if they want to sell a cup of milk to their neighbor, that they think those are the crazy ones. No, you are in the wrong. Now, there can be a prudent case to be made. You know what? In this case, I'm going to let the bully steal my lunch money because if not, I'm going to lose everything. That's a different argument. We are being oppressed and exploited by the state because of people like the sheriff who have adopted, hook, line, and sinker, the mentality that whatever comes out of the state capitol or Washington, D.C. is undeniably what you have to follow. And if there is never a case where you are in the right for disobeying a man-made law. You see, they can't say that, though, because if pressed, they would say, well, you know what? Yeah, there have been some unjust laws. Okay, so now how do we determine what laws are just and which ones are unjust? And this is where people, oh, this is going to be chaos. This is going to be disaster. Well, it's only chaos and mayhem in a man-made system because you have man-made law after man-made law after man-made law. Okay, in a biblical system, you don't have any new legislation. You have judges adjudicating. And we've covered this many times, but it's very important to understand the distinction. All right, and I'll use the raw milk example again. We could use the car example. We could use any number of examples. And what people will do, what closet statists will do, is they'll bring out a boogeyman. Well, if we don't require every raw milk farmer or natural milk farmer to register with the state, then we're going to have disease and food poisoning and everybody's going to die, which of course I've said, before the FDA and before the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, every single person who drank milk died. So that's why we need these departments now. But they'll bring these boogeymen out and say, well, if we don't have the government controlling all this, everybody's going to get sick and die, and obviously in this case, they were even able to determine, the car did belong to him. He does own that car, even though he didn't register with the state. There are other ways to, well, actually, you have no justice in a statist system. The claim is justice, but all you get is injustice, oppression, and extortion. In a biblical system, you have justice. Now, I don't have time to get into how this rally could have been handled without statist means, but there are certainly ways to do it. But the main point here, those who think that, this government regulation doesn't apply to me are misinformed and radical. That is a claim that is made with no substance. And if you really study and dig deep behind it, anyone who makes that claim is a hypocrite. They're doing the same thing. There is no one out there that is following every single regulation or even trying to. Right? I mean, and if there were, it would be like Inspector Javert and Les Miserables. Like you would go insane. You would drive yourself nuts because you would realize every single second of every day you're breaking some man-made law, and it would just destroy you. And so no one lives like that. But you know why registrations are important and registering with the state for your dairy because there's money involved, and the state cares about fleecing the people and extorting money. So anyway, there's going to be much more on this in the future, but this is something that when I heard that, I said, I bet you most people who hear that agree with the sheriff. Oh yeah, well, of course. I mean, we all should get driver's license. We all should register our vehicle. Every farmer should register with the state. It never ends. It never ends if we allow the state to tell us, hey, in order to do something good, you have to get our permission. We are now living under tyranny. I've said it many times. I'll say it again. Any law or regulation that punishes me or requires me to register or pay money in order to love my neighbor is not just. The only role of government in the Bible, it's not to protect us, it's to punish evildoers. It's to avenge, right, the one who has done wrong, to punish the one who has done wrong. That's the role of civil government. It's not to make sure my car is registered. It's not to make sure I have a driver's license, right? Especially for the Christian thinkers out there, I want you to hear that, especially those who say, you theonomists, you don't get it. We need law. We need natural law. We need man-made law. Understand what you're saying. What you're saying is we don't have enough in the Bible for a judge to look at a case and adjudicate. That's what you're saying, because if we had a biblical system, a judge could look at a case and say, okay, this person was driving down the road. They went to Turkey Hill and bought ice cream and drove home. Okay, what wrong did they commit? And the statist over here said, well, they didn't have a driver's license. They didn't register the vehicle. And the judge says, okay, well, I hear that. But what evil have they committed and where have they violated God's law? Did they run someone over? Did they destroy someone's property? And the statist says, no. And this is basically, the Amos Miller case. The statist says, no, but you know what they did? They didn't follow the law from the state or the federal government, whatever that said, you have to register X, Y, or Z. In a biblical system, you don't need those laws. You need a judge to adjudicate. Now, when you say we need natural law, what is that? It's man saying, you know what would be good is if we had a law that said you have to register your vehicle because it's for the common good, right? Because it allows the government to keep tabs on your vehicle. So if someone steals your vehicle, they can find it. That's not the government's responsibility to prevent the theft of my vehicle. I can hire there's private companies that have these etchings on the vehicles, on the windshield. There's different ways to do that. right? That if I want to protect my property, I can. And if someone steals it, I can go to the judge, get restitution, so on and so forth. Of course, insurance, private insurance is an option as well. But I just want to hammer this point home. When you hear stuff like this, and it comes up now and again, in this case, in this alleged potential assassination attempt, that you have people say, oh yeah, this guy was one of those sovereign citizen guys. He's anti-government. And that's not the case. Again, I don't know this guy. Maybe this guy was. Who knows? But those of us who argue for biblical law, I would say rightly say, all of these regulations and all of these punishments for people who don't follow the regulations are unjust. It's not just that they're not wise, they are unjust. Those of us who say that, we are not saying that the government shouldn't exist. We are not saying that laws don't apply to us. We are saying what everyone else believes, even if they don't say it. Namely, there are some laws that are unjust and we will not follow them. Every single statist would applaud Martin Luther, Rosa Parks for that very thing. And so it's just sheer hypocrisy or ignorance for these people to say, oh, you people over here who say, there are some laws that you think you shouldn't follow, you guys are crazy. You do the same thing and you applaud the people who did it in the past. But now, in the case of Amos Miller, for example, people like Rep. Zimmerman and Doug Mastriano are cowards, and they won't defy the state edict that Amos Miller can't sell milk. But so we need to think deeply about this. I would love to, I'm trying to get some more debates scheduled, some natural law debates, because again and again, when I hear natural law spoken about or two kingdom theology, this point is missed, right? And it's something that we try to hammer on this podcast and at Future of Christendom, and Luke does as well on his podcast, Think and Reform. If you allow man to legislate, this is what you get, right? We've come to accept the idea that you have to get a driver's license, you have to register your vehicle. But when that first came out, we should have opposed that. Understand, like right now, if I were to say, you believe that you can get on your bicycle and go for a bike ride without registering with the state, if you believe that, you are anti-government, you're a financial scammer, you're a conspiracy theorist. You think I'm crazy because you say, Chris, obviously we don't need to register our bicycle with the government. Understand, I bet you there's some cities that you do, but understand, well, what happens when that becomes a law? Because it wasn't always the case. You had to have a driver's license. You had to go to the DMV to ride your horse and buggy down the road. So at some point, man created a new law. And if you're going to sit here and throw scorn on people who say, you know what, these laws are unjust from a biblical theonomic perspective, we should not have man-made law. And then you're going to say things like, well, yeah, I shouldn't need to register my bicycle with this. I shouldn't need to register my shoes with the state. I shouldn't need to register myself. Oh, that's right. We do have to do that. And your children, right? So you have to understand, we have to look at this biblically from a theonomic perspective. And the natural law perspective, I don't think has any answer to this. They have no answer. At best, they can say, well, the common good maybe allows for DMV and registering your vehicles, but not for your bicycle or skateboard. I mean, they have nothing to appeal to. Only theonomy has a solution. And I get, and we'll address this later in another podcast, even though we've already addressed it at length. People say, well, yeah, there's going to be differences of opinion in theonomy. You have to understand, there's going to be a judge who adjudicates, okay? That's the extent of the divergence you can have. You can have a good judge or a bad judge. You know what we have now? We have millions of man-made laws and millions of extortion officers out there punishing people for not following the man-made laws. And then if something gets to a judge, you know what the judge says? Well, I'm not actually going to determine whether or not you did something evil or not. All I'm going to do is look at the man-made law. So that's the status system. That's natural law. Natural law is and when we say natural law is amorphous, what we mean is, well, people could use natural law to argue for raw milk laws. They could use natural law to argue for vehicle registration laws. They could use natural law to argue for you have to register, your skateboard. We could make all those arguments. Biblically, I'm not allowed to make any arguments for a new law. I'm just not. All I can say is, hey, here's God's law. If you do evil and your neighbor brings that accusation to the judge and it's found that you're in violation of God's law, you will have to make restitution or potentially lose your life. That's a biblical system, and it's beautiful. So anyway, that's it for today. I just had to comment on those comments by that sheriff because it just reveals the modern statist mindset, and it's rampant in America, and it's even in the church, and even among those who would be arguing for the Reformed tradition, the application of Christ to all areas of life. But if they don't grasp this concept that if man creates laws, we are going to have tyranny. If they don't grasp that, they will continue to argue for natural law against theonomy. And that's not going to be good for this nation. It's not going to be good for America. It's not going to be good for the church. It's not going to be good for any of us. And it will not be good for dominion or liberty. So again, thanks for listening. For more information, go to LancasterPatriot.com or head over to futureofchristendom.org. Again, there'll be content from the conference very soon. So thanks for listening, and stay tuned for more content soon.